Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the webinar launch of the Coastal Flooding Adaptation and Resilience COFAR Challenge 2025. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I'm Pri from the Securities Commission Malaysia, and I'll be your MC for today. Before we get started, I'd like to go through some housekeeping. Now, we know you're seated on the other side of these screens, but we encourage you to use the Q&A function for any questions you may have throughout the session. You'll have ample opportunity to have your questions answered. Now, to get what we're all here for today, the Coastal Flooding Adaptation and Resilience Challenge. We are all feeling the impacts of climate change, whether it's increased temperature leading to more AC use or more frequent floods, making it difficult for us to get places, and even just more damages. Now, we've heard a lot about emissions reductions and renewable energy like solar and wind, but there's been less focus on adaptation. How will we respond and bounce back from the impacts of climate change that we're already feeling and will continue to experience? As such, the SC, in collaboration with ICAEW Malaysia and in partnership with SD Guthrie and CPRI UKM, is proud to introduce the COFAR Challenge, an initiative to encourage innovation to address Malaysia's most pressing climate risks among you, Malaysia's future. Now, we have a packed and star-studded lineup planned today, starting with an overview of Malaysia's climate adaptation landscape and existing adaptation financing solutions, the official launch of the challenge site and a presentation on the site itself, followed by tips and tricks for you to get started in designing your solution. Remember that this is your chance with the experts all present here to ask your questions. We've got Q&A sessions lined up, so get your questions ready. Without further ado, let's get into it. First up, we have Dato Muhammad Faiz Azmi, Chairman of the Securities Commission Malaysia. Dato Faiz has over 38 years of experience in audit and business advisory services, both in Malaysia and the UK. He read law at Durham University and was called to the English bar, and is also a fellow of ICAEW. Dato Faiz embodies the interdisciplinary spirit that the COFAR Challenge calls for. At the SC, Dato Faiz is committed to future-proofing Malaysia's capital market, including to the impacts of climate change. Now, I won't take his talking points away, so without further ado, I'd like to invite Dato Muhammad Faiz Azmi to deliver his opening remarks.
Thank you, Pri. Welcome, everyone. Madam Shinola Gonzalez, Head of ICW Malaysia, Dr. Gary Tissera, Adjunct Associate Professor, Asia Business School, and Chairman of Climate Governance Malaysia, Ms. Anjali Viswamohanan, Director, Policy, Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, Encik Muhammad Zamri Rizwan, Manager, Water Management and Irrigation, SD Guthrie's Berhad, Navakanesh Manathan, Researcher, Southeast Asia Disaster Prevention Research Initiative, or CEDPRI, of University Kebangsaan Malaysia, professors, students, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good afternoon. So welcome to this webinar, organized together, the Securities Commission together with the ICAEW Malaysia. I'd like to first start by recording my appreciation to both ICAEW and our technical partner SD Guthrie's Berhad, and also our knowledge partner, the Southeast Asia Disaster Prevention Research Initiative of University Kebangsaan Malaysia. My heartfelt thanks also goes to the speakers for taking the time today to share their insights. Ladies and gentlemen, the sustainability word is a bit of a buzzword now in policymaking circles and corporate boardrooms. But it is more than just a trend, it is actually a shared responsibility. As taught in Islam and I believe many other faiths, we humans are just stewards of Earth, not owners, and we are entrusted to protect it, not exploit it. So a study published in the Malaysian Journal of Public Health Medicine revealed that climate anxiety is widespread among local youth aged 19 to 25, with over 60% of respondents reporting their fear, powerlessness, and guilt. Such concerns are not trivial. And this is why today, this webinar, and in fact, this whole COFAR challenge is actually to deal with that issue. In other words, instead of worrying about it, why don't you come and find some solutions to it? So this obviously feeds into a broader discourse, one that must ensure that the voices of tomorrow, yourselves, such as many of the students here today, are included as Malaysia grapples with the defining challenge of our time, climate change. Now, much of the global climate conversation has focused on mitigation, which is fine, and this is efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and slow global warming. These actions include switching to renewable energy, adopting electric vehicles, and improving energy efficiency. While mitigation is essential to limit future climate change, it is not enough on its own. Adaptation, on the other hand, is about dealing with the impacts of climate change that are already happening and preparing for more to come. It means protecting people, ecosystems, and economies from floods, rising sea levels, extreme weather, and other disruptions. For countries like Malaysia, where climate risks are already being felt, adaptation or dealing with adaptation is non-negotiable. In Malaysia, water is the main channel through which climate change manifests itself. In fact, floods account for 85% of all our natural disasters since the year 2000, making it the most frequent and common adversity. As an example, in 2021, Klang Valley floods were one of the worst in decades, with over 6.1 billion in damages. While 11 other states have experienced financial losses as a result of floods, the Klang, Petaling, and Ulalangat districts, all in Selangor, suffered the most. Coastal communities in Selangor and other low-lying states already face rising sea level and coastal erosion, which will threaten the homes and livelihoods. Yet adaptation financing still is rather low. This is despite the Global Commission on Adaptation highlighting that the overall rate of return on investments are still in improving resilience. So based on their estimates, every ringgit invested in targeted adaptation can yield 2 to 10 times the return in net benefits, such as avoided loss or economic gains. The cost of inaction, however, is also increasingly clear. If global warming hits 3.2 degrees above pre-industrial levels, Malaysia's GDP could decline by as much as 46% by 2048. That's enough to depress everyone, isn't it? So these stark projections highlight not just an environmental concern, but also an economic and financial imperative. At the SC, we believe that capital markets can be a force for good. Under our upcoming Capital Master Plan 4, one of the central pillars is strengthening sustainability. Our adaptation and resilience initiatives includes site visits, knowledge partnerships, and policy explorations as part of this larger ambition, and some of this work has already begun. One of our main adaptation initiatives is the focus of today, the COFAR University Challenge. This is a unique platform that brings together students from diverse disciplines to propose technical solutions to address coastal flooding across and along Malaysia's vulnerable west coast. Why students? Because we believe the solutions of tomorrow must start today, and they must come from those who will inherit the future. Innovation cannot thrive in silos. It needs collaboration between science, policy, finance, and technology. Today's webinar is curated to do exactly that. You'll hear from experts in climate risks, data, and adaptation. This will hopefully spark a search for solutions. So to all students here on the webinar, let me emphasize that your ideas, big or small, matter. Your proposals may well become the seeds of the next generation of adaptation solutions. Whether you're tackling seawalls or early warning systems or green infrastructure, the power is in your hands. The objective is simple: a well-designed idea backed by technical rigor and financial viability. Together, let us shape the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Faiz Asmi. We are indeed looking forward to the bright and innovative solutions that our students will come up with. And I agree, they are the solutions of tomorrow need to start today. Next up, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Gary Thassera. Dr. Gary is a director and council member at Climate Governance Malaysia, an adjunct associate professor at the Asia School of Business. He serves on the board of the Center for Environment, Technology and Development Malaysia, and is also an advisor to the Malaysian Green Technology and Climate Change Corporation. He was appointed Special Functions Officer by YB Yobi Yin during her tenure as Minister of Energy, Science, Technology, Environment and Climate Change. But today, Dr. Gary is here in his capacity to share about Malaysia's climate risk, where adaptation challenges lay, and what solutions are needed for a resilient future. Dr. Gary, over to you.
Thank you very much, Pri. Thanks to the Securities Commission, COFAR, and ICAW, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, very good afternoon. I'd like to begin, first of all, by congratulating you on being here. I think this is an amazing program, and I wish you all the best as you think about what kinds of solutions might be applicable. Climate change adaptation has actually for far longer than appropriate lived in the shadow of climate mitigation, particularly when it comes to climate or transition finance. Although the initial tone was set by developed countries, and they made the claim that whereas mitigation resulted in global benefits and therefore merited climate financing, adaptation only yielded local benefits and would therefore not qualify for climate finance from developed countries. The private sector now, interestingly, find themselves echoing a similar sentiment, namely that adaptation belongs in the realm of public finance, as adaptation projects, apart from a tiny handful of notable exceptions, for example, the stormwater management and road tunnel or the smart tunnel, are not thought of as generally revenue generating and will not provide a return on investment. But we do know that this now is a gross oversimplification. Mitigation and adaptation, rather than being binary exclusives, actually exist on a continuum. It has long been acknowledged that, for example, mangrove restoration and conservation programs not only increase protection from storm surges, which is adaptation, but also sequester carbon, which is mitigation, while at the same time improving income and livelihoods, which constitute economic and social benefits of the local communities. And they also impact and improve local flora and fauna, which means they provide biodiversity benefits. These show that the many project types can actually have both mitigation and adaptation co-benefits and may come along with ancillary economic, social, and biodiversity benefits. The risks, of course, are manifold. Apart from floods already mentioned by Dato' Faiz, storm surges also impact the coastlines. And these storm surges bring not only inundation, but also salinization as seawater impacts crops on land on the surface, but also intrudes underground, impacting groundwater supplies as well. These have a huge impact on the natural biodiversity, as well as our agricultural systems. And they can have impacts that knock on all along our food chain and into the economy. A great part of our coastal region also is an area that is intensively cropped, not just with food crops, but with cash crops as well. Some of these cash crops are somewhat salt tolerant. Things like nipa, for example, are salt tolerant, but many others are not. Coconuts to some degree can tolerate some salt, but crops like palm are not suitable at all once you get saltwater intrusion into our coastal soils. The other issue that comes up at different points in time, usually during times when we talk about flood mitigation programs, is actually, when river bunds fail or when levees fail, what happens? And this is a problem associated with the engineering that we put into our adaptation plans. Raising levees and raising these bunds that protect us from the rivers actually causes the base of the river or the bottom of the river to rise. And eventually this can rise high enough that it becomes higher than the surrounding countryside, which means that a breach would be terribly devastating. The other impact of actually increasing the height of levees means that you are decreasing the gradient of the overall river. And this can actually slow flow rates and lead to areas of flooding further upstream. In fact, though, one of the most important areas where we face challenges is that there are a great deal of myths that remain that surround the concept of adaptation. And I've talked about one of them already. But I will go into a series of 10 myths here that are widely held and maybe add some bonus myths at the end and give you some areas where you can begin to think outside of the box when it comes to solving some of these problems. One of the first myths is that, as I mentioned earlier, adaptation is only local and benefits don't scale. We do see actually now that when we protect specific areas in the city, the benefits that accrue actually point us to the areas that would benefit from the next step of adaptation. And therefore, we can actually begin thinking about how individual adaptation programs can actually be scaled to protect not just cities or coastal zones, but include regional economies as well. The knock-on impacts also scale and stabilize regional economies, anchoring some of these wider systems. The second myth is that adaptation is investable, that it's a cost, and then there's no ROI with adaptation. Now, this assumes, of course, that there's only one kind of financing, but as we've seen lately, transition financing can be a hodgepodge of different sources of finance, including international grants, including public funds, including private sector financing. And all of these things now can be brought to bear in the kinds of projects that might actually have benefits that accrue to the local communities. They might generate new kinds of industries, for example, ecotourism. They might build resilience by adding food sources, such as farmed fish and the like. They may boost ecotourism as well and protect property values. A third myth that's out there is that taking or implementing adaptation actually means that we're giving up on mitigation. This is also a myth because we've known for a long time that there are many adaptation measures that have mitigation benefits. Think, for example, if you have a cool roof program, immediately not only is your home cooler, but your air conditioning bill decreases as well. Now, decreasing your air conditioning bill not only decreases your electricity bill, it also decreases the amount of electricity that's needed to be generated, and this contributes to mitigation as well. Another myth is that adaptation should only be funded by governments, that the private sector has no role. We've seen that resilience actually drives different types of market stability. We have agri-tech startups that help farmers adapt, secure future crop yields by using new salt-tolerant varieties of crops, drought-tolerant varieties or flood-tolerant varieties of crops. And these are critical for food conglomerates. So public-private partnerships can coexist with private financing or even public financing and allow businesses to co-invest in community, particularly where water security is important to protect operations. Another widespread myth is that adaptation is all about infrastructure, well, whether it's a smart tunnel, whether it's seawalls, whether it's drainage. But there's a great deal of evidence now that points to adaptation measures that are actually living ecosystems. And I mentioned mangroves earlier. There are also other kinds of natural systems, for example, oyster reefs that can break up waves better than concrete seawalls, biohybrid designs, mycelium bricks, coral reef 3D printing. All of these share the space where technology and nature combine. It's been said that it's an urban issue, adaptation, but we now know that adaptation is very important in rural areas as well. Some people think adaptation only benefits humans. That's not true. Natural ecosystems can benefit from adaptation as well. You'll also be told sometimes that data-poor regions, or if you don't have data, you cannot implement smart adaptation. Well, that's not true either. We found places where frugal innovation actually thrives. In India, for example, they use very, very low-cost sensors coupled with some AI to improve flood prediction and early warning in communities. The final and myth that I want to talk about is the myth that once you implement an adaptation measure, it works forever. We know, however, that adaptation is only as good as what you're building it to adapt to. On the other hand, natural adaptation systems actually tend to evolve themselves. Think of how a mangrove ecosystem automatically adapts to rising sea levels by actually building itself up. So there are many ways in which we can think of adaptation and get around some of these myths. You've perhaps heard it said that adaptation is more of a startup mindset. If you have adaptation, if you have that startup mindset, fail fast, iterate, you will find that you will cope with adaptation much better. Think of reversing normal flows, how Amsterdam has developed water squares for storing rainfall in public parks. Always look for the unseen ROI. It may be in the form of urban green spaces, it may be in the form of mental health gains. And then think of justice for adaptation. What role does adaptation play in justice? Things like better land rights for women, for example, better soil conservation, better community resilience. All of these things do play a role and should have an interesting role in any of the projects that you propose. I'd like to conclude on this note. It's very interesting. I wish I remember where I first read it, but I read somewhere that the most revolutionary adaptation projects, all right, the most revolutionary adaptation projects won't look like climate projects at all. Instead, they'll look like thriving communities, they look like regenerative economies, and they will look like cultures that have actually turned vulnerability into anti-fragility. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gary. I think that was a beautiful note to end on, this idea of turning vulnerability into a strength and a thriving community. If I could just summarize, because I love the process of debunking the myths of adaptation. And I think my three favorite points, the first was that this innovative or startup mindset of constant reiteration, your hodgepodge of financing and drawing in all those different sources of financing, which will be necessary to fund adaptation. And finally, I think that adaptation with mitigation benefits, I know I personally would very much enjoy lower electricity bills. So thank you, Dr. Gary, for that. Now that we've covered the science side of things and sort of what are the drivers of adaptation, risks, and vulnerabilities, but how are we going to pay for all of this? And I think that's where our next speaker comes in. I'm excited to introduce Anjali Viswa Mohanan, Director of Policy at the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change, or AIGCC. Now at AIGCC, Anjali works with governments and stakeholders to build investable national climate, physical risk, and transition policies. In her previous roles, she spent several years advising policymakers, investors, in emerging markets on various elements of the energy transition and climate finance. But today, Anjali will share with you about the role of capital market instruments in adaptation financing, which I think should give you some ideas of financing tools you might want to consider when you're devising your solution. Now, a reminder to all participants that we've got a Q&A with Anjali and Dr. Gary after this, so keep typing your questions in the Q&A section for both our speakers. You will want to have them locked and loaded for the next Q&A session. So without further ado, over to you, Anjali.
Thanks, Priya. I hope you can hear me well. I think it's such a privilege to be here to join this session hosted by the Securities Commission, ICAEW, and I think the COFAR initiative is quite unique and essential to actually get the generations that will be sort of facing exacerbated risks to actually think about innovation from a multifaceted lens. And I think through this presentation, I just want to sort of give you a brief overview of how finance sector is really thinking about it and innovating to meet the needs of today. So as pre-mentioned, I'm Director of Policy with the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. We are an investor network. Sorry, I'm just not able. Yes, okay. Yes, so we are an investor network. We work with financial institutions, so the likes of pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, the investment arms of these companies, as well as asset managers that actually develop funds and solutions to bring in a lot of this capital into markets. So we work with 80 plus institutional investors that manage around 40 trillion USD in AUM, and most of these investors are heavily invested across Asian markets. So these are the largest pools of private capital that's coming into markets. And the work that we really do with these investors is to help them understand and integrate climate risks and opportunities into all of their investment decisions. So just to clarify, what we're trying to do is not create smaller pools of climate finance, but to really mainstream climate integration into all types of private capital that's flowing into markets. And I think one of the maybe misconceptions that's been sort of addressed by Dr. Gary, but also Dato Faiz, is that maybe initially a lot of climate-related work, especially from the private sector, was very focused on on mitigation. But I think this is changing quite a lot, not just in terms of understanding adaptation and resilience, but also sort of looking at climate more holistically in terms of nature risks, understanding impacts on communities, and how to sort of really develop a holistic response from the private sector to actually meet the needs of the market. So just to give you a bit of a background on our work on adaptation and resilience, at AIGCC, we started focusing on the topic of adaptation and resilience for Asian investors around 5 years back. This is clearly recognizing that Asian markets are exposed to climate risks in terms of hazards, impacts on business operations. So it's quite crucial for investors to plan and anticipate how these risks would affect their assets, portfolios, and business operations in Asian markets. So while a lot of the work that we initially started out was to really understand how do you anticipate risks better through data, scenario analysis, engaging with corporates, I think quickly over time, what we understood is that if you really wanted to develop resilience for your capital returns, your business operations, you need to think about it quite holistically, because climate impacts is not going to be restricted to one specific asset, and it's going to have significant impacts on things like your workers being able to to enter your business premises. It's going to have huge impacts on supply chains. It's going to have impacts on transport infrastructure, on electricity supply. So you really need to be able to understand what holistic adaptation and resilience planning for a region could look like, that private finance or businesses can sort of really come in to support, which is why around 3 years back, we started developing a focus on really how do you develop holistic adaptation that private finance can feed into. And this is where we sort of really started looking at the types of adaptation and resilience policies that are prevalent across markets. And we found that the UNFCCC guidance on national adaptation plans were actually quite comprehensive in terms of developing an understanding of the types of risks a market is exposed to, working with different types of stakeholders, including communities, finance sectors, businesses, to develop a cohesive adaptation response in terms of projects and solutions, as well as actually, think about effective financing models that could help markets meet these needs. But in practicality, when we really looked at how some of these recommendations are translating into policy implementation, we found that in a lot of Asian markets, it was sort of highly lacking in terms of cohesiveness of policy, but then also in terms of how it's been able to actually engage with different stakeholders. So what we did is we developed an investor expectations of how these policies can be enhanced to enable more private sector participation. And this we've sort of split into 3 main heads that you can see on the left. A lot of it is associated with climate-related information. And I think specifically for issues such as coastal flooding, it's really important to be able to align on the type of risk exposure that a market is exposed to. So for instance, I think we see that there is a fundamental mismatch in terms of the type of risk that you're planning for. So for instance, while the private sector might perceive that you are exposed to maybe a 2-meter sea level rise by the end of the century, maybe from a public and policy planning perspective, you're planning for maybe a 0.5 meter sea level rise. So it's quite important to align on the type of risk that you are preparing for to be able to get into that next stage of project conceptualization. We also found that in terms of policy planning, there isn't enough coordination across the different ministries to be able to understand how different data is being used by different departments in translating that into implementation. So for instance, across markets, it's the ministries of environment that are oftentimes in charge of adaptation and resilience, but we don't see them working very actively with ministries of finance, ministries of civil works, development, and others to really translate that into implementation. So we think it's quite important to see cohesiveness in adaptation planning to enable different sectors and the private finance to really come in. And I think it's also important to substantiate top-down data on risk planning with bottom-up data that you're getting from corporates, specifically now with the climate risk disclosure being made mandatory across multiple markets, including Malaysia. And you also need community-level information to be able to match top-down and bottom-up data to enable effective planning. You also need to look at, the time horizons that you're planning for. Are you looking at a 100-year time horizon? Are you looking at impact of hazards across different sectors? What types of scenarios are you planning for? Are you planning for like a 1.5 degrees centigrade increase, or are you looking for something more? What are the terms that you need to sort of align on so you have a common data platform that you're using to develop solutions? The second bit is a bit more about looking at risks that are a bit more not understood enough. So this would look at, say, impacts of climate risks or hazards on society, workforce. Also, I think in terms of national adaptation plans, you tend not to consider risks that are beyond your border. So transboundary risk, for instance. This is sort of really looking at supply chain risks, transport related issues across borders, water supply issues and others, which are quite important to consider for holistic adaptation and resilience, but are not being factored in enough. And then I think lastly, we were sort of looking at mechanisms where you can enhance policy to enable more private sector participation through more representation in stakeholder engagements, but then also on working more closely with the private sector right at the outset to create a project pipeline that investors can use themselves to innovate on the types of finance that can come in. And we're seeing some good examples of all of these different elements as well. I would encourage you to take a look at our report, which is up on AIGCC's website. What we have done is we've analyzed 9 Asian markets and to understand where they are at in terms of implementation of some of these recommendations. So we've used sort of a traffic light signal indication of like green, red, amber to sort of show where markets are at on each of these recommendations from investors. But the report also really deep dives into each of these markets to understand what types of policies are in place. And we also try to highlight best practices across each market so it can be used to help other markets move forward quicker. And why we developed this piece of work is we really think that investors can drive some of these positive policy responses in markets to enable them to come in at a faster pace to actually meet the needs of the markets before the risks exacerbate to a level where, adaptation finance needs become higher and higher every year. So that's what this report really does. But I think in terms of overall indications that we're seeing across markets, at the moment, there's clearly a lot of movement towards trying to identify data platforms and measures to actually align on the risks that markets are exposed to in terms of flooding risks, heat stress, and really sort of translating those risks into a very localized sort of understanding of how these risks would affect people and workforce and assets as well. We are seeing very positive signals of mandatory corporate disclosure across markets that would enable the usage of bottom-up data as well. And we're seeing very good examples as well on how private sector is being engaged through platforms both at the national level, but also international level, for instance, with the UNFCCC focus on country platforms under the Baku to Belém roadmap. There's quite a lot of efforts to sort of try and align the needs of the private sector for them to be able to come in quicker, and what can governments do to enable that as well. So all of this is in our report. I just want to spend the last few minutes in really talking about how private sector has already been coming in, especially to address coastal flooding risks. It's one of the hardest areas of adaptation, I think, to address. But just to sort of look at what's been happening across regions. So just looking at the examples of Japan, Netherlands, Philippines, these are really where sovereign issuances are being done. So this is sovereign bonds that are being issued to really target where the use of proceeds are being used for meeting flood-related needs in these markets. With Netherlands and Philippines, a lot of it is, I think, coastal flooding focused. In Japan, I think it's an interesting element where it's a local government coordinated effort to really try and map out risks, map out which communities and corporates are affected by these risks, and co-developing projects to actually plug in these risks and using a local adaptation bond to fund the needs of these specific projects. The AIIB one is also quite interesting. This is the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank. It's a DFI based in China. And so it has issued climate adaptation bonds, I think, for 2 tranches now over 2 years. This is very targeted towards private sector coming in and using their funds to support adaptation needs, specifically targeted towards emerging markets in Asia. And this has a flooding component more specifically as well. I think the Invesco example is a really good one, where the private sector has really come in to try and understand the adaptation needs of markets. And they've developed a $500 million fund, which is really catered towards drawing in private and public blended capital to support adaptation needs in markets. This has also a coastal flooding element, which I think is quite interesting. It's, I think, one of the few funds of its kind that's championed by the private sector. But what's enabled this to happen is really understanding the project level adaptation needs in the market, so they can actually think through what types of bonds can sort of support these projects as well. I think there's just 2 important reports that I would encourage anyone that's attending this call to go through. So 2 of the sovereign wealth funds of Singapore, GIC and Temasek, have put out reports to sort of really talk about the adaptation and resilience investment opportunity for the private sector. This is sort of really looking at the fact that what really attracts private sector to innovate on private capital need is certainty. And now the world that we are living in is clearly locked in to receive a certain amount of warming, a certain amount of hazards that's bound to come with being on a close to 1.5 aligned trajectory already. So you're bound to see a world that would be increasingly in need of flood risk solutions, increasingly in need of heat stress solutions, landslides. We are locked in for these risks. So what the private sector is really doing, and this you could see through the GIC report, is you're trying to map what types of risks would manifest and the types of existing and future solutions that are required to cater to this risk. And there's a huge pool of opportunities that the private sector can really come in to address. In fact, the GIC report looks at a $9 trillion market opportunity for resilient solutions that the private sector can come in to cater to. The second one is a BCG and Temasek report that really looks at a private equity angle towards adaptation and resilience. This again sort of comes from the same fundamental approach that you are locked in, but I think it's quite an important, useful report to look at, because it looks at a sectoral approach to the different types of solution that would be required in a world that's affected by large amounts of global warming, and it sort of maps out which sectors are more easily financeable by the private sector. So you're going to be seeing where services, products that are already being needed, like for instance HVAC, the heating and cooling solutions, are sort of already in requirement, and there's a huge opportunity set there. But you're going to be seeing projects like coastal resilience needing a bit more of innovation to become more mainstream for the private sector. So it does a good mapping of that. And then I think that the last important development that you're seeing that would attract more private sector is the development of taxonomies and clearer indications of what would qualify as adaptation finance. So you're seeing taxonomies being developed at the global level. There's a Climate Bonds Initiative taxonomy, but you're seeing this also translate to regional level perspectives of what adaptation finance could be. You're seeing country level developments, you're seeing ASEAN level developments as well on really qualifying what adaptation finance could be. And I think all of these are important resources for anyone that's thinking deeply about these issues. I think that's it from me. I'm just going to leave my contact here as well. So if anyone's interested to reach out and discuss this further, please do. I'm very interested in this topic and very happy to support this initiative as well. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Anjali. That was really insightful. I think it was really helpful to get students starting to think about what the financing instruments that are available to us and to the students to be able to incorporate into their solutions. I especially appreciated your slide on the developments in instruments, which I think gives them some clues as to capital market instruments they may want to consider, such as bonds, or even funds when devising their solutions. Now, I am conscious of the number of questions that we're getting in at the moment, and there are quite a few that are on the challenge itself. Now, I do want to highlight that the next section of our webinar will go into the challenge specifically, and that may answer some of your questions, and we will have another Q&A session right at the end. But for now, I'd like to take some of the questions that are directed to what Dr. Gary and Anjali went through today, both on the science of adaptation as well as some financing instruments. I see that Dr. Gary, you got a question on how much of the current data do we have access to in the public domain? And Dr. Gary very rightly shared the data catalog by the Joint Committee on Climate Change, which is co-chaired by the Securities Commission Malaysia and Bank Negara Malaysia. And that sort of catalogs all the existing public domain data, as well as some private data that's available out there, which participants you might want to consider using when coming up with your solutions. But Dr. Gary, I do want to check, based on the data that is available, what kind of data should students be looking at when they're considering their solutions and coming up with their solutions, and what data is there available for them to be considering?
Oh, well, that's thanks for the question, by the way. And the answer is it really depends on the kind of adaptation measure that they're thinking of implementing. It can be something that involves the threat of floods, the risk of floods. It can be something that might actually address the more intense rainfall that we're receiving. It could be something to make, for example, outdoor workers safer and protected from outdoor working temperatures. So there are any number of scale devices that can be used, all the way from friendly thermal friendly clothing, portable shading, rehydration technologies. All of these things actually have a big role to play in making life livable under 1.5, 2 degree increase in temperature. So you need to look at what it is actually that you're trying to address, and then look at the suite of solutions. I mean, this is never going to be a single solution. It's going to be a suite of solutions, particularly as you will want to both be able to function in the current policy space, and then also, as you're thinking of your solution, think of how the policy space itself is going to evolve, and how to make your discovery or your plan or project long-lived and actually compatible and aligned with future policies as well. So it can be as simple as just tracking urban heat island effect, looking at temperatures there, and already there's information on the benefits of doing construction at night, for example. And so there are both peer-reviewed journals out there that are looking at these environmental issues and the consequences of regulatory guidance for things like outdoor work. And then there are just research papers that deal with things like rates of salinization in places like the Mekong that could serve as models of what's happening here on the west coast or east coast of Malaysia as well.
Okay, cool. Thank you, Dr. Gary. I think if I'm understanding you right, that it's we really want the students to be reading the problem statement closely than if we're trying to understand what kind of data they're going to be looking at. So if, for
Yes.
example, it's coastal erosion or saltwater intrusion, they're going to be wanting to look at sea level rise data or coastal data, coastal flooding data, rainfall patterns in order to understand basically what are the drivers that they're trying to address.
Yep, also things like extraction of groundwater that could accelerate the intrusion of seawater and things like that. So a place like Kelantan, for example, in the mouth of the Kelantan River, where there's a great deal of groundwater extraction. I mean, you might expect much greater extent of seawater intrusion, underground than you would, for example, on the West Coast, where we have well-developed surface water delivery systems. So, I mean, it can be as simple as an issue of, look, how do we get surface water delivery? I mean, we're right next to a freshwater river. How do we get freshwater delivery to parts of Kelantan where actually, they are extracting too much groundwater, so that we can actually build a greater hydraulic head on the landward side and push that salt water underground back out to sea, so that we can continue farming rice in that very important part of the country.
Got it. Thank you, Dr. Gary. I think that's helpful. Anjali, actually, a question for you. Before I get into that, actually, we're getting loads of questions in the chat about the problem itself. I promise we'll get to that at the end of the Q&A. We have some experts on the challenge itself who will give you some insights. But Anjali, there's actually a question on the fact that private capital often gravitates towards mitigation projects like renewables. And you talked a bit about the instruments and the financing instruments that you've seen implemented to be able to fund adaptation. But how is adaptation finance marketed or made more attractive to investors?
I think really the reason that we're focusing on like a policy response to adaptation, to sort of give private sector a bit more clarity on what types of adaptation measures and resilience needs to be built for markets, I think is fundamentally like a place that, investors are already sort of looking at to get more clarity on what's needed to bring in terms of private capital coming into a market. So I think policy itself, I think, is a big driver. Like even when you sort of look back at what really enabled private sector to mainstream mitigation, right? It started off with like clear policy signals that, you wanted to see a holistic response to reducing emissions, looking at alternate sources, subsidies, project conceptualizations, pipelines that actually got the private sector to sort of do that. And I think we're seeing a similar movement on adaptation as well in terms of policy across markets. So for instance, in Malaysia, NRES is currently the Natural Resources and Environment Ministry is currently in the process of developing Malaysia's adaptation plan that's looking at meeting the needs of what the private sector would also need in terms of an investable adaptation plan. And I think that's something that all governments are sort of looking at more seriously, because if you sort of just look at the scale of capital that you would need to build adapted and resilient societies, the scale is quite huge. And quite frankly, you will not be able to do that without the private sector if you want to do it in a time scale where you're protecting people and, land from large scale, climate hazards. So you need to sort of start moving on it quite quickly. And I think policy has quite a big role to play. I think apart from that, it's also a misconception that, capital is not going into adaptation and resilience at all. Actually, if you look at it in terms of corporates, especially in Asia, that are exposed to different types of risks, there's already capital that's being allocated to sort of build shelters to protect, people from heat. You are already looking at, flooding impacts that's affecting operations, and you're already sort of allocating capital to build out adaptation and resilience solution. You're just not tracking it enough because it might not be classified as adaptation finance as yet. But there is quite a lot of capital, if you really look at it, that's going into adaptation, especially in Asian markets. But I think the way to really incentivize larger pools of private capital is to sort of give a clearer policy signal. And I think from the private sector, with the two reports that I pointed out with GIC, Temasek, and I think it's a trend that we're seeing with asset owners in the region, the sovereign wealth funds, the pension funds, they are prioritizing adaptation because they see this as a real risk. And for the private sector to come in, you need to try and identify opportunities. And that is really what everyone's trying to do through these reports. Identify the opportunity set for investors to be able to come in and help solve some of these problems as well.
Thanks, Anjali. I think you're exactly right. I think the idea that just because the label isn't there with adaptation, it doesn't mean that capital isn't flowing into it, and that it is essentially future-proofing all these businesses and corporations to ensure that they will be able to survive the risk that the climate impacts pose. I think we have time for one more question, and I think this one's directed to Dr. Gary. We've gotten two of these actually on sea level rise and what we're expecting for Malaysia. So what sort of range are we expecting in terms of sea level rise in Malaysia? Where are we expecting areas to be hit? Where are the most vulnerable areas across Malaysia?
Okay, this is an interesting question to deal with. We have measured on average about 2 to 3 millimeters of sea level rise per year. And it varies depending on where you are. If you measure it in Tanjung Piai, or you measure it elsewhere, or even on the east coast of Sabah and Sarawak, you will get different numbers. But the important thing to note is that sea level rise is not a linear thing. We are constantly monitoring all of the land ice masses, and those are the ice masses that, if they were to melt, would actually raise sea level. We know that ice that's floating in the sea, even if that melts, it doesn't raise sea levels. But the interesting thing is that we are now in a temperature regime that is actually more consistent with an ice-free Greenland than with an ice-covered Greenland. We used to think that Greenland iced over about 2 million years ago when conditions were actually a little warmer. But we've actually realized with new evidence underneath the ice in Greenland that Greenland iced over in conditions that were around 400,000 years ago, as opposed to 2 million years ago. And 400,000 years ago, it was actually cooler than it is now. So the situation now is actually consistent with, more consistent with an ice-free Greenland. Now, it's not going to happen tomorrow. Between 1 and 3 kilometers of ice sitting on a landmass is not going to melt even within 10 to 50 years. But it is conceivable that by 2050, at least, we may have sea level rise between 8 to 16 inches, which is about 30 cm. So you know, thinking in British terms, about a foot or a third of a meter. All right, by 2050. Now that is already very, very significant, because if you look at any of the simulations of 0.33 meters of sea level rise, you will see that much of the economically important zones in Malaysia, on Malaysia's coastlines, are already impacted. And in my view, we should already be planning on actually how to live with that sea level rise, whether it comes from, you know, letting mangroves build up new protection, new islands, new land masses on the seaward side of our coastlines. You know, all of these things, we can use nature to actually help us do it, and nature does things a lot more efficiently than we do.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gary. I think that's a scary figure to be thinking about 1/3 of a meter. But I think it's grounding and important for us to think about also, and for the participants to think about when they're designing their challenge. How can you develop a solution that's modular, that can maybe be built to adapt and continue to adapt as we progress and as we face increasing climate impacts. I'd like to thank Dr. Gary and Anjali for their presentations. Thank you for grounding us in the landscape of adaptation and for giving us sort of an insight and introduction. Now, I think for the moment that we've all been waiting for, I'd like to officially launch the COFAR Challenge with our launch video. Let's check it out together.
Bencana banjir yang melanda setakat ini 8 buah negeri di Malaysia pada ketika ini.
Manakala di Selangor juga sebanyak 59 pusat PPS telah dibuka menempatkan lebih 4,000 mangsa.
We are also seeing issues with regards to sea level rise as well, because at this point in time Carey Island is already below sea level. And we are also looking at challenges around erosion of soil around our coastal areas and also riverbanks as well.
Could we come up with a scenario that actually encourages engineers, accountants, scientists to sit down and suggest ideas as to how to deal with that scenario? That it had to be at least two faculties. The engineering side for building it and the finance side to how you're going to fund it. SC is getting involved because the capital markets will be needed to fund that difference. We may need to try and bring the wider society together to try and raise that money.
Wow, I've got goosebumps. We've seen the headlines flash on the news about the recurring floods across Malaysia, you know, whether it's Sri Muda or Port Klang, but now you get to play a part in devising the solutions of tomorrow. Now, today marks the official challenge launch. The deadline for team registrations closed 25th August. Teams will have the opportunity to visit Carey Island and the site on 11th September. And while this is not mandatory, it's highly recommended to get an idea of what your solution needs to withstand. The first checkpoint will be on the 19th of September online, and the second checkpoint on the 14th of October at the Securities Commission Climate Adaptation and Resilience Conference. The deadline for submissions is the 17th of October. Shortlisted teams will pitch your ideas to a panel of judges at the ICAEW Sustainability Summit on the 4th of November, and the winners will be announced on the 6th of November at the ACMF International Conference. Now, this is an excellent chance to meet leading experts in finance, sustainability, and engineering to showcase your critical thinking and gain great exposure in the field. So we hope you seize this opportunity. Now, I know we've got a lot of questions here about the challenge site, and the financing. So next up, we have a deep dive into the challenge site, Carey Island. Now, as you heard in the video, Carey Island is below sea level and already experiencing the impacts of saltwater intrusion and coastal erosion. It presents the perfect test bed for you to trial an innovative solution and address a problem that we've heard over and over again, coastal flooding. To walk us through the challenge site, I'd like to introduce Tuan Zamri from SD Guthrie. Now, Zamri leads water management and irrigation at SD Guthrie's upstream Malaysia, where he drives sustainable practices across the company's extensive oil palm estates. In his role, Tuan Zamri provides advisory support to operational units, addressing and resolving water-related challenges with a particular focus on effective water management and irrigation practices for coastal estates. In other words, he's the man you want to be directing your questions to on all things relating to the challenge site. Tuan Zamri, over to you to present the official challenge site, Carey Island.
Hi, thank you, Pri. Hi, Assalamualaikum and very good afternoon, everyone. I will brief all of you on the Carey Island site information, a case study that explores climate adaptation strategies. This presentation is part of our contribution to the COFAR challenge, and we hope it sparks meaningful ideas among you. Let's begin with a visual journey, a time-lapse of Carey Island coastline. This video captures the dynamic changes over time, highlighting erosion, tidal movement, and the evolving landscape. As you watch, consider how these natural forces shape infrastructure planning and community resilience. Carey Island was once a mangrove swamp, transformed over a century ago into plantation. The plantation was rubber initially, now predominantly in using the oil palm. It spans about 1/5 of the size Singapore and extremely low-lying with some areas 6 to 8 feet below sea level. Owned mostly by SDG 3, an island faces increasing climate risk, especially from rising sea and flooding. This context set the stage for our cases study. Here's some breakdown of Carey Island. Consists of two estates, east and west, covering over 11,300 hectares and protected by 82 kilometers of earth band. This band serves as a critical lifeline protecting the island from the encroaching tides. The infrastructure includes the gates, palms, and heritage building, all serving a population of around 3,000 people across the area. Our case study focused on climate adaptation strategy, particularly flood and water risk planning. The goal is to build long-term resilience through smart climate adaptive infrastructure. The West Jetty is a focal point due to high exposure to tidal forces and its role on emergency access. This slide shows a historical incident at the West State Jetty where bund slippage occurred due to underwater current. It underscored the vulnerability of coastal infrastructure and the need for targeted intervention. During the incident, the top bund width left with less than 4 feet, and at the time, the tide level was 5 meters. We repaired the bund using the rewrap method. We pile the coconut trunk, temporarily construct the earth bund using surrounding soil, apply amber rock to reconstruct berm at riverbank, install non-woven geotextile, lay and arrange red stone to protect the outer bund slope. The jetty faced multiple threats: strong currents, sediment disruption, and structure instability. These issues affect not just logistics but also community safety and economic continuity. High flow velocity at the bend exacerbating erosion. The current speed more than 1 meter per second could pose navigation hazard and affect structural integrity. The rationale for selecting West Estate Jetty is to assess and enhance the structural resilience against climate impacts by addressing the riverine current impacts. Here's a review of the jetty and surrounding area. It helps students to visualize the vulnerable zone and the importance of strategic planning. This image supports our selection of the jetty as a case study. Ladies and gentlemen, near our bund, you can observe the water current lifting the fine soil particle from the riverbed of the banto. The moving water swirl and carries this sediment upward into the flow, giving the water a cloudy or murky appearance. This indicates that the underwater current is strong enough to disturb and potentially weaken the structural integrity of our bund. Carey Island employs a mix of structure and nature-based solution. These include ban upgrades, water monitoring system, and mangrove restoration. Vetiver grass is used to stabilize ban slopes and coconut trunk reinforced with point. This effort aims to balance engineering with ecological resilience. Nature-based solutions are central to our approach defined by IUCN. Nature-based solutions are actions that restore and manage ecosystem to address societal challenges. We categorize them into restoration, infrastructure, and management approaches. These solutions are site-specific and must integrate local knowledge and biodiversity. Continuous effort and initiative taken by SDG3 in protecting the shoreline and riverine in Carey Island include the application armor rock band, riprap method with non-woven geotextile, band heightening and repairing, coconut piling whenever needed. This method helped to mitigate the impact of river currents and tidal waves against erosion and defense against climate impact. Mangrove trees, with their extensive root system, act as natural barriers against strong winds, wave, and storm surge, effectively reducing coastal erosion. This dense roots network of mangrove trees bind soil together, preventing it from washed away by current and tides, thus stabilizing the berm or riverine bank while contributing to the ecosystem health. While vetiver grass is highly beneficial for strengthening a bund, its fibrous root system that can grow from 2 to 5 meters act as natural anchor, binding the soil and preventing erosion. To ensure the efficient and rapid evacuation of excess water from the estate, screw gates and electric pumps are strategically installed in coastal, low-lying field, and riverine of the estates. These systems are vital for managing flood risk, enable to immediate reduction of water level to avoid floods or waterlogging in vulnerable areas. Despite this effort, challenges remain. Existing infrastructure lacks capability for future climate conditions. Maintenance is reactive and predictive tools are underutilized. There's a need to strengthen the synergy between NBS and engineering solution. The COFAR challenge encourages innovation in coastal flooding adaptation. Our approach integrates smart monitoring, hybrid infrastructure, and nature-based solutions. Financial sustainability is supported through green bonds and ecotourism. Through thorough discussion between our management, West Jetty is identified as strategic zone for piloting flood adaptation. This area offers innovative opportunity, tackling the challenges of climate impact in riverine areas by integrating technologies like GIS, hydraulic modeling, and machine learning that offer powerful tools for forecasting and planning. In closing, Carey Island offers a compelling case for integrated climate adaptation. It's a living laboratory where engineering meets ecology, and where your research, and idea could make a real impact. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you for all participation.
Thank you very much, Tuan Zamri. That was a very helpful presentation to also give us an idea of what the challenge site looks like, as well as what sort of data and features that the students should be looking at when designing their solutions. Students, I hope you were paying attention to the graphs and the tables in Tuan Zamri's presentation, but not to worry if you missed it. There will be a recording of this uploaded on the COFAR microsite. Next up, for all of you who have stayed, you will get to hear straight from Mr. Navakanesh Batmanathan on the data and some tips and tricks of how to tackle the COFAR challenge. Nava is an earthquake geologist and research assistant at the Southeast Asia Disaster Prevention Research Initiative, CEDPRI UKM. He's currently pursuing his PhD at UKM, and as part of his doctoral work, he's investigating vertical land motion and its implications for coastal susceptibility in Western Selangor and Sabah. He was also awarded the National Geographic Young Explorer in 2017, which demonstrates his keen commitment to using data-driven solutions to address disaster risk management. Today, Nava will walk you through some tools that you might use to get started on designing your solutions. Now, pay close attention and get ready to fire your questions at Nava. This is your chance to get ahead in building the best and most resilient data-driven solutions. Nava, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Pri. Yeah, thank you for that amazing intro. Yeah, moving on. A very good afternoon and a very warm welcome to everyone. So as Pri said, yeah, my name is Nava Ganesh and Padmanathan and I'm from SIGPRI. So we are the official knowledge partner for the COFAR Challenge. And I'm actually grateful for this opportunity to present here today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Yeah, the slide is not... Okay, yeah. This challenge focuses on one of the most pressing issues for coastal community, which is the coastal flooding. So what is coastal flooding? By definition, coastal flooding is the inundation of land along the coast by seawater. And why it's happening? It's driven by multiple factors, including climate change, rising sea levels, urbanization. We have these natural conditions like monsoons and tides. In this case study, yeah, we are looking at Carey Island, which is an area that is vulnerable due to its proximity to the coast and exposure to high tides, heavy rainfall, and anthropogenic activities. So moving on. Slow down. Yeah, moving on. Before we can even think about designing an effective solution for coastal flooding, we need to ground our work in for some reliable data. So here are some of the suggested data set from both government agencies and international sources. So if you look at the first one, we have the Info Banjir GPS Selangor, which is developed by the DID Malaysia, Drainage and Irrigation Department. So this is a real-time warning system which has details like rainfall, water level, flood cameras, and flood gauge. So you can access all this information in the following link. But bear in mind that these are real-time data, so you cannot access all the historical data. And also we have this tidal prediction systems where you can access to the link prepared by Jupum, so you can get all the tide information. Also, you can have the access marine data sets such as these bathymetry, tide level, wave, and current, and so much. So there's a lot of information in the links here, but it's not available for the entire coast. So it's only for some of the selected areas. So I've checked the link and there are some available data sets for Carey Island, which you can use for the challenge. And also, if you look at these international sources, we have this sea level projection tools developed by NASA. So these informations like these projected sea level rise under different scenarios are available, and also the land cover information. So we have all this Sentinel-2 land cover, which is up to 10-meter resolution. So it's pretty good resolution. So you can get to see a lot more information. So you can access through the link here, and also the tide level information you can access through this PSMSL link. So where they have information on the past tide level data. So it goes up to mid 80s to it starts somewhere in mid to late 80s. So you have a big data set there, and also you can access informations like these elevation data sets, topography data from the free GIS data link. So in this link, it's not just limited to the elevation data. We also have all this hydro related information and much more than that. So you are free to explore these links, and there are also other links out there, but this is something for a start that you can use to explore. And moving on, yes. So I'm just gonna show what we have in our database. So this is our SIGPRI database, and these figures that you see here, these are created just by gathering information from open source information like the newspapers. It was all basically from newspapers, and we were able to translate all this piece of information from the newspaper into different categories of flood. So you see we have categorized pluvial, fluvial, coastals, and all, yeah, as I said, it's all coming from the news, and it's, yeah, so you can actually do wonders with all this open source data. And here, what we have done is how this open source information were translated into maps. So if you look at these event distribution, all these flood events, these are all that was captured from the news, and we have translated into maps, and we have overlaid with this 100-year flood zone maps, which was developed by the DID Malaysia. So we have overlaid on top of this to see the extent of the event within this flood zone. And also with all this information, what can you do? As you can see, these 4 figures, these are from past studies. You know, what they have done is they have used free open source data to develop such maps. And you can even use these maps to do this prediction. And yeah, as I've said, you can do wonders with all this open source information. Yeah. So moving on. So now, with all these data sets and with all this information, I'm sure you're wondering, like, where do I even begin, right? So as a group, so the first thing will be to defining the problem, right? So you want to know what is coastal flooding, why it's happening, and where it occurs. Okay, our focus is on Carey Island, so we have the focus area. But before that, we need to understand what is coastal flooding and why it's happening. And yes, with an understanding, now we can move on to extract these informations that I've shared earlier. Like we have these open data sets, we can get all the information. And now with this information, what can we do? We can now have an understanding about the flood history of this region. Flood history, and also the elevations from the open source. We can know how close are the areas to sea level, and also we can have information on the population density, and the rainfall and tide data are available also. And with all this information, what are we going to do? The next step is to formulate an approach, right? So we want to have an understanding of where and why coastal flooding might be a problem, right? So we're going to formulate an approach. So our approach should be a data-driven solution. So these solutions must be feasible and technically sound. And also you need to also understand that these solutions must be practical, and it has to be based on proven concepts. So we know that all these solutions are proven concept, but most important is it has to be adjusted for local conditions. So because every local conditions it's different, and area specific, it will be very different. So we need to make sure that it is adjusted for local conditions. And finally, how these solutions can be implemented and what are the resources we need. So we may require government collaborations. We need fundings, right? So we need financial instruments, and of course community engagement is crucial. And also it needs to have like a very clear cost recovery strategy, which actually estimates the maintenance costs. And also the most important thing is these solutions should be innovative, and it must be scalable with potential for implementation, and also involves community and stakeholders. So make sure that when you are presenting your solutions, right, either through documents or video, it's important that you communicate your idea clearly and concisely. So your presentation flow must have a very logical structure. And also the most important part is you please work as a team. Everyone and each member should understand the whole project and contribute during the presentation. So please practice your presentation and make sure the delivery is smooth and well coordinated. So I think that is the most important thing here. And finally, I would like to thank you once again for the opportunity to for presenting at this a challenge. And I know that as a closing remark, I would like to just say that coastal flooding is a complex challenge, but with the right data and innovative thinking, we can create solutions that are practical, scalable, and sustainable. So together we can turn these ideas into real impact for the communities that need it the most. So with that, thank you very much and have a pleasant day.
Thank you, Nava. Thank you for that. I think it was really helpful to see you walk through the process right from the problem and identifying the problem statement to how you use the data and the maps, to then trying to figure out an implementation strategy. I think it's giving students an idea of the process that they too will have to go through, and how they might use the data in order to inform the context of their solutions. Now, everyone, we're heading into the Q&A section, the final part of our webinar. In addition to Nava and Tuan Zamri, we are joined by Ms. Shinola Gonzalez, Head of ICAW Malaysia, and Kavina Maniam, Assistant General Manager at the Environmental Department of the Securities Commission Malaysia. Now, we have a host of questions. I think I'd like to send over the first question to Tuan Zamri. We've gotten some questions on what are the main climate risks faced by Carey Island today, which I think you alluded to in your presentation, but also how successful has mangrove restoration as one of the solutions that you said SD Guthrie has experimented with. How successful have mangroves been in responding to these main climate risks?
Yes, we can see in last 10 years rainfall reading, there are incremental of rainfall record, whereby normally for Carey Island, the rainfall data around 2000 mm below annually. And last 2024, our rainfall record increased up to almost 4000 mm per year. So to avoid any flooding, to avoid any waterlogged, we already installed the electric pump to discharge out the excess water. And at the same time, we can see also the incremental of the sea level rise from 4.5 or 4.7 meter. And by September, we might have 5.5 meter. The tide level, the highest tide level in September lah, on the 11th. That's why we are proposed the 11th September to visit the Carey Island, and student may experience by themselves, can see the area much more clearly.
Okay, thank you, Tuan Zamri. And I guess when they come and visit the site, they'll also be able to take a look
Yes.
at the effectiveness of the mangroves, where it's been
Yeah.
successful, which areas it maybe hasn't been as effective, and where their solution will sort of need to fill in the gaps. Kavina, I think we have some questions on the financing part of the challenge itself. I think one of the questions that came in is, does the solution need to generate income to cover the cost of the project? And also, what sources of finance are available for students to use to fund the solution? Maybe you could give us some insights on that.
Thank you, Pri, for your question. And yes, so one of the key requirements of the challenge is that the solution must have a revenue generated in some form. So you must have a solution that incorporates both the engineering perspective, so the infrastructure, as well as the financial perspective. So yes, it must cover your costs. So you have to think of creative ways in which you will generate revenue. So for example, ecotourism, you can look at case studies abroad of what other people have done to generate revenue. So these kind of revenue generation streams must be incorporated within your submission. In terms of what kind of financing options there are out there, again, I would encourage you to look at what has already been done outside, but examples could include financing a solution via green bonds or sustainability bonds or sustainability linked bonds. So there are very clear criteria you need to meet in order to issue these kind of bonds. You would have to identify who the issuer is. Is it Is it the government? Is it a private company? Who would be the issuer in this case? How is this issuer generating the income to pay the coupons for this bond? You need to set out these kind of requirements. So that's bond financing. And of course, another type of approach that is discussed is blended finance. So how private capital can blend with other forms of capital, like philanthropic capital, to propose a solution that might work for adaptation. So those are just some examples to highlight.
Thank you, Kavina. That's helpful to know. I think also in terms of looking at solutions from other areas, if we're talking about what Dr. Gary mentioned at the start, solutions like ecotourism, aquaculture, other sort of revenue generating activities can help to complement your solution. We have some questions from Sarah Hassan, as well as others on what exactly needs to be included in the challenge solution, your submission itself. And I think in the chat, we've now dropped the challenge brief, which will give you an idea of what exactly you need to submit ahead of that 17th October deadline. So we suggest you check that out. But Shanola, I think this question for you, in the challenge brief itself, it talks about, what needs to go into the design brief. You've got the technical concept and the flood resilience strategy. You need your capital market financing model, which has CAPEX and OPEX, a revenue generation strategy of at least 10% recovery, and then your visuals. But what sort of finance-related information can we expect from students in their submissions?
Thanks, Pri. I think you covered it in terms of what is required for the brief. From an accounting angle, I think you need to think about it very holistically, not just in terms of your various indicators that you can learn from textbooks. I would urge you to think about it holistically. What is important here is we're dealing with a real life case study. So whilst the numbers will give you the arithmetic or the number that you're dealing with, what does that actually mean? I think that is really what will set your answers apart from everyone else's. It's the thinking behind the finance and the actual problem you're trying to solve. So what you need to include will be included in the brief. When you read it, you'll see the ROI, the 10% cost recovery, the capital amount, operational expenses. But really what you need to take a step back and think about is how does this impact the real life problem that we're facing now? And how is it what is the workaround? And how do the finances play into it? So pretty much not just here's the numbers, what you do with it. It's what is the story behind it? What is the story that the numbers are showing me?
Thanks, Shanola. I think that's helpful to note because you have the numbers in front of you, but until you understand how those numbers fit into a larger picture, it's not going to tell the story of your solution. Nava, I think a question for you. We know that, and I think Tuan Zamri explained a bit more in his presentation about solutions that have been trialed and tested. Do solutions that students propose have to be brand new, or can they be improvement of existing ideas? And if they're improvement of existing ideas, what would that look like?
Yeah, I mean, it could be something new, or it could be as well, like you say, an improvement from an existing structure. So what we are looking at is something that integrating both these engineering-based and nature-based solutions. So something like that will be it would be like the best solution, I would say. So yeah.
And now, what's an example of maybe certain solutions that you've seen from other contexts, so not specifically Carey Island, but in different areas that have combined this nature-based and engineering?
These green infrastructures, which has like both mixed ecosystem and human systems. If you look at some of the nature-based solution as well, they have done the sand trapping, tree trenches, storm water parks. So something, yeah, like green streets. So these are some of the prime examples, but but if like we can combine both, like like we have mitigation structures, right? We have this groins, this offshore breakwater structures. So something that's engineering based, and you combine with this nature-based solution like this sand trapping, this tree trenches, green streets, yeah, all these things. So these are some examples that the students can use. Yeah, so there's actually a lot more. So they should actually try to do like some reading and try to understand. And once with that sort of understanding, they could able to link this engineering and this nature-based solutions. And also before we can even think about implementing a strategy, right, we need to look at the ground conditions, right? The soil condition. The soil conditions might be different in other parts of the area. So since we are like focusing on very site specific, we're focusing only on Carey Island, right? So we need to look at how those physical parameters of the area, and from that only we can propose something like a hybrid solution.
Thanks, Nava. We're getting a question now from an attendee, and I'd like to direct this one to Tuan Zamri. The study site already has adaptation strategies in place for many years, but this attendee assumes that these strategies maybe aren't currently income generating or may not be effective in the long term. Would this be correct? Would they be understanding this correctly, that the adaptation strategies maybe haven't worked? And if so, what are the gaps in the current strategies, and what do solutions need to do to mitigate these gaps?
Yes, Pri. It's not consider long-term solution, as the sea level rise is keep on increasing, maybe by 10 years or by 5 years. So the current adaptation that we have won't solve the issue permanently. So we need to explore any additional method, or maybe we could go for adaptation of the new technologies, some sort like the GIS and whatsoever. So if the student have the chance to visit the site, they will get more clearer picture on this part.
All right, thank you, Tuan Zamri. And there's a few questions on logistics of the competition that maybe I'll direct to Kavina. We've got two questions here. One on how long should the solutions be intending to address the problem? What timelines are they looking at in terms of their solutions? And also, who will be judging the submissions?
So we have a stellar lineup of judges in mind, and we are in the process of releasing these names. So do stay tuned to our website, which is on the link, and you will find out very soon. And sorry, the other question was on how long the submissions should be. So there are very specific criteria on your submission requirements, also available on the website. But in general, it's a 10-page written submission with a 3-minute video submission as well.
Thank you, Kavina. I think we are heading into the final round of questions. Last one maybe for Nava, and then we'll see if any others are left standing. But Nava, when introducing nature-based solutions, what sort of timeline are we looking at for them to be developed and then to actually start reaping the returns of those, the benefits of those nature-based solutions?
Yeah, I mean, it has to be something long term, right? So because like something like engineering structures, over time it degrades, and it has a lot of this cost involved. So but nature-based solution, it's not going to involve much cost. And when we talk about the timeline period should be, yeah, it should be long term, something long term. Yeah.
And when we're talking long term, what timescales are we thinking of?
I don't know, maybe more than 50 or 100 years, so that we're talking about adaptation, right? So we are talking about long-term adaptation, and we want something that is cheaper and requires less maintenance. So yeah, so it has to be more than 50 or even 100, or if you can provide a solution that can last more than 100, that would be great. I mean, but
Thanks, Nava. I think that taps into sort of the core of this challenge, that its adaptation is forward-looking. You're working on much longer timescales, but you're looking and you're trying to balance that with the cost, right, of the nature-based solution versus the engineering solution. On what timescales is it degrading? So these are all considerations that I think students will take away from this webinar and consider when developing their solutions. Unfortunately, we're reaching the end of the hour. But I'd like to thank our panelists for answering the Q&As. If you have any other questions, which I think we're still receiving, but if you have any further questions, please reach out to malaysia@icaw.com. It'll also be dropped in the chat, and we'll get back to you with any further clarification. But to close us off today, we have Shanola Gonzalez, head of ICAW Malaysia. Shanola has over 20 years of experience in the financial industry, with her experience encompassing managerial finance, financial accounting and reporting, business consulting, business development, and M&A. As head of ICAW Malaysia, Shanola plays a pivotal role in expanding ICAW's membership and presence in the country. Without further ado, please allow me to welcome Shanola to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you so much, Pri, and congratulations to everybody who's actually still logged on to this webinar. It's been a really good session, and thank you so much for being part of this very important and unique launch. We spent the afternoon hearing from technical experts and climate specialists, and we've learned about tidal surges, bund erosion, and the science behind sea level rise. But let's bring this to what it really means. The reality is, Malaysia's coastline is not an abstract line on a map. It's home to millions of people. It's where families fish, farm, build their futures. And yet in Carey Island, our challenge site, much of that land sits below sea level. When the tide rises, the water doesn't politely stay at the shore. It pushes in, it corrodes infrastructure, and it threatens us. So this is not a future problem. It's a now problem, which brings us to why you're here. This COFAR challenge is more than just a competition. It really is an incubator to challenge our thinking. It's a call to combine what you know, engineering, finance, environmental science, community planning, and really use this opportunity in ways that has never been tried before. Let's be honest, if the solutions were easy, they would already be in place. So what makes COFAR different? Firstly, it's real world. This challenge is not hypothetical. You've heard from our experts today, Carey Island exists, its risks are documented, and the needs are urgent. Secondly, it's integrated. It's not just about building stronger walls. It really is about blending technical resilience and financial resilience. Solutions that don't just work in theory, but as I said before, it needs to be a holistic look at the problem that extends beyond balance sheets, budgets, and the capital markets. Thirdly, and the most importantly, it's collaborative. You will note that we have checkpoint 1 and 2. They're not hurdles. They are really your chance to learn directly from the people working on the ground, get feedback, pivot if necessary, course correct, to fall back into your ideas. Now you might wonder where ICAEW fits in. What's an accounting body doing in a coastal resilience challenge? The answer is because climate transition will fail without finance that works. At the ICAEW, particularly with our next generation ACA, we put sustainability, ethics, and technology at its core. Our profession is no longer about keeping score, it's about shaping the game. We're working on green bonds, climate risk disclosures, carbon accounting, financial models. The chartered accountants of our body is involved in various finance solutions and that can make ideas like yours possible. And here's the best part. Anyone from any degree can pursue the ICAEW qualification, which is why you all belong here, which is why the challenge ahead needs all of us. So over the next few weeks, you'll be challenging what you know, working in teams that might think very differently from you, and that's a positive. building solutions that will have to survive both the forces of nature and the scrutiny of investors. And when you stand at the ICAEW ASEAN Sustainability Summit in November, you will really be in front of an audience that matters: regulators, industry leaders, policymakers, and people who can pick up your ideas and carry them forward with you. This is a platform. So imagine this, it's the year 2040 and you're standing on Carey Island, children are playing near the mangroves. And someone tells you back in 2025, there was this student challenge, and one of the ideas from that competition became the backbone of our flood defense. That could be your idea. So I leave you with this. Don't just aim to meet the brief, aim to change the story. Bring your boldest thinking, challenge the assumptions, and make the model that you put forward possible across Malaysia's coastline. Before I close, I would really like to thank the Securities Commission Malaysia for its foresight and leadership in launching this pioneering initiative. COFAR reflects Malaysia's commitment to sustainability and resilience through policy, partnerships, and people. It is the very combination that drives real change. From all of us here at ICAEW in Malaysia, we believe in your ideas, we believe in your leadership, and really, more than anything, we're really excited to see the solutions that you will bring. Thank you so much, Pri. I'll hand that back to you.
Thank you very much, Shanola. I like that ending note of looking out at Carey Island and thinking that that your solution forms the backbone. I think that's something that we can all aspire towards, and I'm looking forward to receiving the submissions from all our participants. And with that, that brings us to the end of the COFAR University Challenge webinar. Thank you to our speakers for sharing their insights, both in terms of Malaysia's adaptation financing landscape, right down to the challenge site and tips and tricks to tackle the challenge. We hope you're all fired up and ready to kickstart designing your solutions with prizes of up to 50,000 ringgit and exclusive networking opportunities up for grabs. Remember to register your team by 25th of August. The link is in the chat and also available on our website at sc.com.my/COFAR/COFAR-challenge. We look forward to receiving your registrations, and until the next checkpoint, thank you very much.